project with other developers. Awesome. We have package.json. We installed few dependencies. And now I'd want to cover why having package.json is so crucial when we start sharing our project with other developers. And for this example, I'm going to use GitHub as well as few basic Git commands. And my assumption is that since this is somewhat of a advanced course, you're already familiar with Git and GitHub and you have the account. If you don't, please stop the video, create the account, and just use your favorite search engine to learn about the basics of setting up the GitHub repository as well as basic Git commands. So our task is to push this up to the GitHub. And now, $1,000,000 question. Are we just pushing everything up, including the mode modules, which for the most projects is going to be somewhat big? I believe I just checked. In our case, it was like 9 megabytes, but trust me, it always gets way bigger than that. Or we would just want to send the code. And you can probably already guess that since I'm implying that the size is too big, that we'll have to push this up to the GitHub without the node modules. And we'll start by creating a dummy repo on the GitHub. So let me open up a new window. I'm going to go with GitHub and I'll just create a temp repo. And then I'm just going to create a repo and I'm looking for these 3 commands. Essentially, I would want to get that URL, the remote URL, so I know where to push it. And then inside of the repo, before we set it up as GitHub repo, first I would want to go with new file and we'll create a git ignored. Because of course, what I would want is to place the node modules in a git ignore file, because that way they will be ignored by my source control and I won't be pushing up this giant folder to the GitHub, because you'll see in a second that there is no need for it. So we're going to go with / and then node modules. And if you're not familiar with git ignored, it's just a file that specifies which files are going to be ignored by the source control. And in our case, as you can see, I'm placing node modules inside there. Then I'll clear my console and I'll just initialize this as an empty git repo. And then we'll add everything. So git add, git commit. We'll just say first commit. And then I'll copy and paste those 3 commands in order to set up that URL, the remote URL. And once I have this in place, I should be able to go back to my GitHub. And there it is. This is my repo. Now, probably your next question is, okay, so we pushed it up to the GitHub, but I can clearly see that in my app.js, well, technically, I'm using the Lodash dependency, right? But we didn't push up the node modules folder. So how the person who is going to get this repo will be able to run the code in the app.js, since there's no node modules and you told us previously that we can only run it if the dependency is there. Well, let's check it out. I'm going to go with clone option. So I'll just get the URL. I'll navigate back here and I'll do that in desktop. Again, it doesn't really matter. We're just going to go with desktop and then git clone. Now I copy and paste the URL. I'll open up a new instance of my text editor, copy and paste. And this is where the magic happens. If we have package.json, we simply need to run npm install. And what is going to happen, the npm will check for dependencies that we have in the package.json and automatically set up that node modules folder. So if I go here, first of all, I can see that there has been some changes. That is already good news. That just means that I have my node modules, and if I refresh, check it out. So now, of course, I have my node modules folder. And if you have been using React applications, you're probably already familiar with this one, where again, when you are setting up the code, you're not sharing the node modules folder. And I can showcase that by taking a look at my React projects. And that's not what I wanted. I didn't want to look at my awesome picture. What I wanted is React, and then let's go with projects. And you'll see that in that repo, we have bunch and bunch of folders, and each folder has two more folders, final and setup. And now check it out. None of them have the node models, because imagine the size of this sucker if I would push for every project, for every folder, the node modules. Instead, I have package.json. So when you get the repo, when you clone the repo or download or whatever, then of course you get the package.json. And in here, these are the dependencies. And you just run npm install and they are being installed. Okay. Hopefully it is clear that why it is so crucial to have the package.json, because we can just share the code without dragging the massive node modules folder with us. We can simply just provide what packages our project is using. And then once we get the repo, then we just run npm install. That is the command. And then npm will install all the packages that are in the dependencies. Awesome. We're familiar with npm. We're familiar with package.json. Now let's finally install the dependency that we'll use for the remainder of the course. And that is no other than the Nodemon. And of course, if you want to get more info, you can visit the npm and you can search for the package. But as far as the general setup, it's just going to watch our files and then restart our app for us. So that way we don't have to each and every time type node and then whatever the file name. And we can install it as a simple dependency. That is definitely an option. But since I also would want to cover dev dependencies, we'll install that as a dev dependency. And the command for dev dependencies is following, where we go with npm and then I or install whatever. And then we go with Nodemon. So that is the package name. And then you can either do -d. So that just signals that that is a dev dependency, or you'll see this save and dev. So again, whichever method you choose, that is really up to you. But just remember that both of them will save it as a dev dependency. So let's install it, and then I'll talk about it. Well, why we would want to set up as a dev dependency. And the reason for that is because if we think about it, do we really need Nodemon in production? And the answer is no. When we push it up to DigitalOcean or Heroku or whatever, we'll of course use something more serious than Nodemon to restart our application. PM2 comes to mind. But while we're developing, yeah, that is an option. So in this case, we'll add right away Nodemon to the dev dependencies. Now, what else? What kind of packages we would add to dev dependencies? For example, testing packages. For example, linting. For example, formatting, and that sort of thing. Again, nothing stops you from jamming this in dependencies, but if you think about it, it makes way more sense if we add this as dev dependency. So we use it while we are creating the app, but then once it's in production, then we just share the dependencies that actually the app is using, not the ones that we used while we developed the app. Hopefully that is clear. And once we have the package, we're almost there. Now we just need to understand how the scripts work in a package.json. And at the moment, as you can see, we have the test one. We won't use that one. And inside of the scripts object, we just set up the commands. And as a side note, we can set up the command right now, even without the Nodemon. For example, I could go with start, and that command will be equal to npm, node, and then, for example, app.js. So that is my command. And once I save my package.json, instead of running this node app.js, I can simply run npm and start. And there it is. As you can see, same functionality. I run app.js and I get back the array as well as the hello world. Again, we still exit the application. So it's not like we're out of the woods, but I'm just showcasing that, yes, we can set up the commands, and then in the command, we just provide a value. And in this case, of course, it is node and app.js. Now, for some commands, you can simply type npm start, as you can see, but for some of them, you'll have to provide the full value, and that is going to be npm run. And in order to showcase that, I'm going to go with dev, and that one will be equal. And in here, we're going to go with a Nodemon and then app.js. So instead of running node, like we're doing in the start, now I'm setting up a dev command. And in order to run this one, I'll have to go with npm run and then whatever is the command name. Again, some of them you'll be able to use the shortcut where you go with start, and some of them you'll have to go the full route with npm run and then whatever is the command. And as a side note, yes, you can still run npm run start. This is also going to invoke the command, but in our case, we have the dev, and in here I have Nodemon and then app.js. So let's try it out. Let's save first the package JSON, and you should notice something pretty cool where if I go with npm run and dev, now I'm spinning up the Nodemon, and it tells me that Nodemon is watching my application. And since I know that, of course, we can test it out, where I'm going to go with console log, and then instead of the hello world, which I have after new items, I'm going to go with hello people. And you should see something interesting where once I change the text, yep, Nodemon restarts my app. And now, of course, my value is hello people. Awesome. So now I don't have to type every time the node and then whatever file name. Nodemon automatically just restarts my app, and I simply set it up as a script. Now, if you want to change this around, if you don't want to run npm run dev, you can simply say Nodemon and then app.js and just remove the dev one completely. And as a side note, again, if you have worked with React projects, you are familiar with this setup, because for React, again, we run npm start, and then there's a value that spins up the whole React dev server where we can see our application. Not bad, not bad. Well, we're still on a roll. Let's cover how we can uninstall the package as well. And as a side note, if you want to stop the Nodemon, just press again Control and C. And notice how we're, of course, stopping the Nodemon. And again, if we would want to spin it up, we'll just go with npm start. And as far as uninstalling the package, we have the command for that, and the name is uninstall. So I'll stop the Nodemon, and in the terminal, I'll type npm uninstall, and then, of course, the package name, which in my case is going to be a bootstrap. Now, this is one of the approaches how we can do that, and there's also a nuclear approach. Now, why I'm calling this a nuclear approach, because that way we remove the whole node modules folder, and don't worry, once you run the npm install, then of course you set everything back up from the scratch, as well as you would remove this package log JSON. And don't worry, I will cover the package log JSON file a bit later. And the way that is going to look like, well, we can first clear the terminal. I'll install the bootstrap from the scratch again. So I'll say bootstrap here. And by the way, probably need to add npm I. And now again, as you can see, I have it as my dependency. And then, like I said, the nuclear approach is removing the node modules. Yep. And then removing the package log. And then just running npm install. Now, of course, in the package JSON, if I want to remove the bootstrap, for example, in this case, I can simply remove it from my dependencies. So I just remove it in the package JSON, then clear everything. And then we go with npm and then install. And now we'll get from the scratch the node modules, since we're the ones who removed it. And also we'll get that package -lock JSON. Now, why am I showing you that nuclear approach? Because if you have used Gatsby, you know that Gatsby is somewhat notorious for sometimes just being a little bit annoying, where you do need to remove the cache folder, you do need to remove the node modules as well as package lock. And then once you start up everything from the scratch, then as a magic, the Gatsby app starts working. And check it out. If we take a look at the node modules, now, yes, there's a bunch of modules that Nodemon is using, right? But there's no bootstrap, and I can clearly see that because there's nothing under the letter of B. So we can clearly see that we removed Bootstrap